Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the information session for the Housing and Community Development Nonprofit Capacity Support Grant information session. This is Richard Livingston. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff and Communications Director at the Department of Housing and Community Development, and will facilitate this afternoon's information session. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the Dhcd website following this session for reference at a later date or for individuals who attend. You will be muted for the duration of the information session until we get to question and answers at the end. You are, however, encouraged to use the chat feature and the question and answer feature should you have questions that you think of along the way, or questions for me as the host or our other panelists. I will now go ahead and turn the program over to Director Donaldson to provide us welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this virtual meeting to get more information on what we're, I think, really excited about, which is an opportunity to help those nonprofit organizations that are on the front lines right now, addressing needs in our community related to our response and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. I have to say that this is, as you can imagine, those of you who know that before I became director here at Dhcd, I actually ran a nonprofit housing organization and homeless services organization, and went through the last recession in the 2008, 2009, and knew that any kind of support that could be found that especially provided some help for operating support was going to be essential to the survival of many a nonprofit, including the one that I used to administer. So I just am very excited. My team is ready to share with you what the parameters are. We do have to adhere to the guidelines from HUD for the Community Development Block Grant, and we will explain that in detail so that you know what uses you're going to be able to propose in your proposals. But part of this effort is really the part of the district and the administration, the Bowser administration's response to COVID, and to recognize how essential it is that the organizations that are community-based, that are working with, helping with housing counseling, helping with our rent assistance programs, that are helping to address the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, also need support. And so we are looking forward to your applications. We are intending to fund all qualified applicants. So we ask that you make your proposals that follow the guidelines that are going to be presented today, and know that we look forward to that and being able to help you as soon as possible. I do want to now turn over the agenda to Deputy Director Sheila Miller, who's going to walk you through the RFA and what are some of the requirements and what it is that information we're going to need to get from you. But again, it gives me great pleasure to be able to say that this is a program specifically for nonprofits that are on the front lines in our community, and we're grateful for all the efforts that you are making. So thank you again, and Sheila, I'll toss to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Good afternoon, everyone. Starting with overview of the program, the Director touched on this a little bit, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. Dhcd will provide $2 million in HUD, CDBG, Community Development Block Grant dollars to support housing and community development nonprofits who have experienced an increase in administrative cost and administrative costs due to COVID, disruption in operations due to COVID-19. Next slide, please. Eligibility. 501c3 nonprofit organizations that are focused on housing and community development are eligible to participate in this program. The organization must serve the district residents and business owners by providing affordable housing services and community development services or public services or activities. The organization must be based in DC, and all services and program expenses which are reimbursable or requested must be provided in DC. And finally, the organization must be registered in good standing with DCRA and our Office of Tax and Revenue. Next slide, please. Eligible uses for the program. There are a lot of eligible uses listed here. I'll just highlight a few. I'm sure if there are any questions, please be sure to include them in the chat box. Again, the program is geared towards providing operational support for COVID-related operational expenses. And that includes and not limited to salaries, wages for employees, rents, utilities, repairs and maintenance, establishing remote operations, establishing new programs, or modifying existing programs to address the COVID health crisis. Communication cost, insurance, equipment, and other COVID-related costs determined by Dhcd to meet the eligibility criteria for the CDBG expenses. Next slide, please. Scoring criteria. Each application will be scored on the following criterion. Each will receive up to 20 points. First, expenses proposed for the reimbursement, program goals and objectives and services, program evaluation, organizational capacity and relevant experience, and finally, financial management and budget. Again, each category will receive a maximum of 20 points and for a total of 100 points total. Next slide, please. I think we're going to turn it over to Leslie Edmonds.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Leslie Edmond. I am the Housing Compliance Officer here at Dhcd. And I'm going to give you some basic information about CDBG, which is the funding source that we're going to be using, as Deputy Director Sheila Miller mentioned earlier and Director Donaldson. So CDBG, otherwise known as the Community Development Block Grant Program, is administered by HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, per the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974. So those are the guidelines that we are using in order to implement this program, and the actual regulations for the program are found at 24 CFR Part 570. Additionally, you have to comply with federal requirements for grants management administration, which are located at 2 CFR Part 200. So those are known as the super circulars, and they're all encompassed there for auditing requirements, cost principles, and uniform requirements that you will have to comply with as part of this program. Next slide, please. So as far as roles in regards to the application and the program, recipients have a key role in administering the program as well as Dhcd. So the district is the recipient of the CDBG funds, and we have to comply with those guidelines as administered by HUD. So that includes project management, financial management, as well as administering the programs and the plans in order to receive our entitlement funds. So all of the activities that you are doing as a grantee would help us administer our program. So we report on that every year in what's called the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report, otherwise known as the CAPER, and we submit a plan to HUD called the Action Plan, which is also rolled into our 5-year consolidated plan. Additionally, in your role as a recipient of these funds or potential grantee, you're administering these programs on our behalf, and you have to comply with the same guidelines and rules as Dhcd found in the CDBG regulations at 24 CFR Part 570. So as through this, you're going to be executing it on our behalf in compliance with the program, and we'll give you additional details and information after the RFA to help you administer your programs. Next, Julia Wiley, our General Counsel, will give you information about legal obligations.
It appears Julia's having technical difficulties. I will proceed past her slide and we'll come back to her if I can work with her on those issues. But for now, Sheila, this is you.
Okay, all right. Hello again, everyone. The next slide, Zoom grants. I believe most of you may be familiar with Zoom grants application. All of our applications will be submitted electronically via Zoom grants. Incomplete applications and those submitted after the deadline will not be accepted. In order to submit the application, you must have a Zoom grant account. And setting up a Zoom grant account is very easy. Just follow the link that's in the RFA and it's highlighted here on the slide, https://zoomgrants.com. It will walk you through setting up an account and a password for your application. Should you need technical support, there is a link within Zoom Grants that you can click on for technical support should you need it while you're submitting your application. Next slide, please. Are we ready for questions or are we ready to go? Can we go back to Julia?
It appears Julia still has issues. I make a very poor excuse for a general counsel, but we'll go to the condition slide and just pause for a moment so folks can read it, and I will share in part what she was intending to share, which is that if awards are made and you're selected as a recipient, you will have to enter into a grant agreement with the department and agree to certain terms and conditions. And in addition to that, while the application requests certain documentation, some are listed here, there are additional documentations that will be needed once an award selection has been made, and they're listed here so that you can take the time to gather them either for the application if they're required in the application or afterwards should you receive an award and need to submit them as a part of the grant agreement. And those include organizational documents associated with your nonprofit like articles of incorporation and bylaws. You'll need a board resolution, a certificate of good standing, a clean hands certificate from DCRA, verification from the Department of Employment Services, and any opinions of your counsel, drug-free workplace certification, and a debarment affidavit. And should we get Julia back on, hopefully she can answer any questions specifically related to those items, which is a good segue to the question and answer portion of this information session that I will work my best to facilitate. And so what I would encourage folks to do is to submit questions in the Q&A feature. I saw some that came in the chat and I'll work to ask those verbally in addition to in the chat. And then as with all questions through this information session or through the email associated with this application, all questions and answers will be published so that all applicants can see those responses. And so if we're unable to answer a question during this live session, then we will ensure that it gets answered and posted on the DHCD website and communicated to participants. So I will refer to the questions in the order that I saw them and work as a team to respond. So the first question I saw is, may the funds be spent in fiscal year 21 to cover any budget shortfalls in fiscal year 21? And then a follow-up to that question is on page 5 of the RFA, said the deadline is 7/13, but on Zoom Grants it says 7/20. And so I can take the second part of that question, which is that the deadline is indeed July 20th, that the typo you're referring to on page 5 is a typo. July 20th is the actual deadline. And so Sheila or Leslie, can you answer if the funds may be spent in fiscal year 21 to cover budget shortfalls in fiscal year 21?
If you don't mind, I'm going to defer to Leslie because I'm not sure if it's a CDBG requirement or not. So Leslie, can you take that one?
Yes, they could be spent in fiscal year 21 if the expenses go into that part of the fiscal year, since it's only July and we're in the last quarter of 2020. But they would have to be related to the COVID response that's happening now.
And for those on the call who don't follow the district's fiscal years as closely, we are currently in fiscal year 20 that ends on September 30th of 2020, and we begin fiscal year 21 on October 1 of 2020. So when the questioner asks about fiscal years, those are the fiscal years they're referring to. Thank you both. We'll proceed to the next question, which is what ideally should be included in the work plan and what is the grant period? Leslie or Sheila, do you want to take us?
Sure. The work plan should outline the program that is you're recommending or proposing for the grant. So that should include a description, a full description of the program, organizational staff, in term and an explanation of how you intend to execute the program. If we're talking about reimbursable expenses, you would still cover those same areas. Overall description of the program, the staffing and organizational capacity and staffing that was needed to execute the program, and the associated expenses tied to that program. Also, the work plan should include how you measure success. Well, let me back up. The second thing, the work plan should specifically address how your program has or will address the COVID-19 crisis in terms of support, whether that be in housing and any other program that you wish to stand up to address the needs of the community right now. And then 3, how do you measure success? What are your goals, measurements, and how do you plan, and what's the frequency in which you're going to measure the goals? And then cost. What is it going to cost? A detailed description of how much is going to cost, not just overhead, staffing, administrative expenses, a full detailed budget. For those of you, the nonprofits that are on the phone, that are on this webinar, if you've received a grant from us through our neighborhood-based activities program, it's pretty much the same program work plan that's required. But that's in a nutshell a description of what that work plan would look like. And we could provide a list of a detailed description on our website for your convenience.
Thank you, Sheila. And the second part of that question was, what is the grant period? And the grant period is through the calendar year. So the grant will run from the date of execution through the end of the calendar year 2020. So December 31, 2020.
Correct.
The next question is, can we confirm that community development organizations include those of us that provide support to small businesses? Leslie, can you take that one?
Sure, it does. It is definitely eligible under the CDBG guidelines and the way this program is being designed.
We love a good yes or no answer. Thank you for that. Next question is, what is the board resolution supposed to be for? Leslie, that one also for you?
Sure. So if you're selected afterwards as part of the condition precedent, you must, as a standard practice, you need to have a board resolution saying that you are eligible to participate in the program. So in order to actually get the money, you need to put this forward to your board of directors of your organization and have a resolution that's signed stating that you can participate in the program.
Great, thank you, Leslie. Next question is this application open to organizations that provide affordable housing but don't currently provide services? Leslie, also for you.
Sure. So technically, under the guidelines of the RFA, a community development organization that does do affordable housing is eligible. We have to see what you're proposing, though, depending on what project that you have, because you can do affordable housing and not actually be building an actual project right now if you're helping people in the community to get those services.
I would also add, this is Sheila Miller, I would just also add to what Leslie said, keeping in mind that this has to be COVID related. So if it's housing that's been impacted due to COVID, or if you're providing some type of housing as it relates to COVID, again, we need to make sure that everything is tied to COVID-19.
Great. We continue to work through questions, and I forgot to mention that if you are calling in, that I will need to unmute you in order to answer your question verbally. And so when we get through the questions submitted in the chat and the Q&A feature, I will circle back to any participant that's calling in, and we'll unmute you in turn by calling on the first 6 digits of your phone number. But we'll continue to answer questions in order, in which case next question is, if chosen, when is the disbursement done by DHCD?
Well, we'll work to disperse funds. This is Sheila Miller. I'm sorry, Richard. We'll work to disperse funds as quickly as possible. Richard mentioned the application close period. We will need time to review and assess each application. And as the director said at the top of the informational session, our goal is to fund all eligible applicants. So we would need enough time to do that as well. But our goal is to certainly disperse funds as quickly as possible once we go through the review process.
And I understand our general counsel may be back on, so I've unmuted her in the hopes that she can hear us and can answer the question as it relates to the reimbursable component of this grant. So Julia, the question is, if chosen, when is the disbursement done by DHCD?
Okay, disbursement would be done after the grant agreement has been executed and the invoices are submitted through the DC vendor portal and are approved. And disbursement should occur no later than 30 days after the invoices are submitted through the vendor portal.
Thank you, Julia. And before we proceed with additional questions, since you're back on with us, I would like to revisit the legal slide that we had prepared for conditions, such that you can share those with the group.
Okay, in terms of the grant agreement outlines the terms and conditions of the funding award. Prior to executing the grant agreement, once your organization is selected as an awardee, we will provide you with a template grant agreement that you can share with your legal counsel. They can review the document with you and explain it to you so that you thoroughly understand it. And as Leslie indicated, there are a number of conditions preceding that must be submitted before we would execute or disperse funds, to include submission of your organizational documents, the articles of incorporation and bylaws, which describe the activities that you are organized to carry out, the board resolution, which is approval of your board to enter into this agreement, a certificate of good standing that's issued by the District Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, Clean Hands Certificate, DOE, Department of Employment Services verification that there are no outstanding employment taxes owed to the district. We would provide an opinion of counsel letter, which states that there are no organizational issues or other contracts or legal agreements that your organization is currently obligated to, that there's nothing that would conflict with this particular grant agreement. We also provide a drug-free workplace certification, which is a form that DHCD provides, and a debarment affidavit indicating that the organization and its the president and other officers are not debarred from doing business with the district or the federal government.
Excellent. Thank you, Julia. We will now return to question and answer, in which case the next question that we have is regarding the items required for the grant agreement, whether they're also required for submission with the application. And Julia and Sheila, you may need to tag team this because I believe some of the items required for the grant agreement are also included in the application, but not all. So Sheila, I'll turn to you first.
Yeah, would you mind putting that slide up? And I could highlight which ones we need to have. There we go. Okay. So from the list, in order to submit a complete application, I would first suggest answering or addressing all of the questions in Zoom Grants, followed by uploading the following documents. Your board resolution, which again, as Ms. Edmonds described, this gives the nonprofit the authority to enter into any type of a grant agreement or arrangement. So having that up front is important. I would say that the other items, along with the organizational documents, those two items we would like to have at the time of application. The certificate of good standing and all of the other items can be submitted post submission of your application.
Thank you, Sheila. So we'll read in the written responses to Q&A which items are required for submission of the actual application, noting which additional documents you can take the time to gather should you receive an award. So thank you for the question.
Yes, and Richard, I would also add to, I mean, that what you had on the screen was just the legal documentation, but there are other documentations such as the work plan, the budget, et cetera, that are all spelled out in the RFA, and it's also in Zoom Grants. So I would use that as your guide to what's needed to complete the application.
Great, thank you, Sheila. And the next question is also for you, which is that Zoom Grants has a character limit. Are applicants allowed to add additional pages if they need to be in the last section for attachments should they wish to provide additional information beyond the page and word count limitations?
You should be able to upload additional information if needed. So if you're trying to answer a particular question and you run out of character space, you can certainly add or include it in an attachment and just say refer to attachment and upload into the application.
Great, thank you. Leslie, next question is for you. As a part of the CDBG requirements, will grant recipients be required to collect documentation of income, including evidence of benefits, tax returns, et cetera, for those served with the grant funds?
So technically this is to reimburse you for the costs associated with the COVID activities that you're implemented during the emergency related to CDBG eligibility. So you're not actually getting a current DHCD CDBG grant where you're doing housing counseling, or maybe some people are, but no, we're not going to be asking you directly necessarily. It depends on what activity that you're applying for that's eligible. So it may be that we're going to reimburse you for actual direct costs associated with housing counseling that would be eligible under CDBG. So that may be staff time or temp work or resources and materials for activities that technically would have been CDBG eligible. So that answer would be no in that case.
The next question is for Sheila, which is that the RFA lists multiple expense categories, but the Zoom grants form asks you to choose one. Can multiple expense categories be included in the ARAG grant request, but also the application?
Yes. That can be included yes, the answer is yes. So the Zoom grants allows for one. If they're additional, I would include that in this supporting documentation and upload that into Zoom grants.
Great, thank you. Jumping back to the chat, which had questions before some of the final questions in the Q&A, which is, does the funding have to be for one specific program, or if your agency has multiple housing programs, can this request for COVID-19 related cross programs? So I think I'm paraphrasing the question and may ask Ms. Munton to put it back in. Can you apply for multiple expenses related to different programs, or is it for one specific program? And Leslie, I think you've already sort of answered this, so I'm going to refer to you.
Sure. I think all of the activities that you're engaging in that would be eligible, you should be able to, as far as this going to work in Zoom grants, but as long as it's eligible and meets our guidelines, I don't see why you would not be able to do that on what we have proposed.
Thank you, Leslie. Next question for Sheila. Does the board resolution come after the award or before we apply? That is, does the board resolution need to be included in the application materials?
It would be good to have it if that's possible. I would say it is, if you're not able to submit that at application, then I would make a note as to when you'll be able to submit it. Because I do recognize for some nonprofits, before they enter into a grant agreement, they have to take it before their board. But it would be good to know as we go down the road and start to process the application, that the nonprofit does have the authority to enter into this agreement or pursue this grant. So again, I would say if you don't have it at the time of application, I would make a note into Zoom grant to timing of when you'll be able to submit it.
Thank you, Sheila. Next question is for Julia, which is, since the grant provides for expenses in fiscal years 20 and 21, what can be the grant period, January 2020 or October 2019?
The grant period would be from the date of execution through the end of the calendar year, and or it may include any time period during which the mayor has declared a public health emergency in the district.
Thank you, Gina. And we have a couple questions focused on the board resolution again, which, to paraphrase the response, is that we'd like to see the board resolution submitted with the application, but it is not a required document in Zoom grants. So it can be submitted at a later date, like we see it at the beginning of the application, which should answer some of the next couple of questions.
Correct.
Thank you. And then returning to the Q&A, this next question is for Julia, I believe, perhaps Leslie as well. What is DOES verification listed on the compliance slide? Do you want to take that?
DOES verification is the Department of Employment Services verification that the organization owes no employment taxes to the district.
Muted, apologies. Thank you, Julia. Next question is not a question, but it's a request, which is to please provide a link to the work plan information that will be placed on the website. And Sheila, I believe that's free.
Yeah, we can do that. We'll put that on the website in the Q&A.
Great. Continuing along, both a clean hands and good standing certificate are required to apply. Where can we get a good standing certificate?
It is not required to apply, but it is a requirement to receive the grant proceeds. So it's something that we'll need when it's time to execute the grant agreement. It is not a requirement at application.
And Julia, do you have thoughts on where someone can find or get a good standing certificate?
You can get the good standing certificate from the Disbursement Consumer and Regulatory Affairs Division.
Yeah, Richard, perhaps we can include the link on our website under the Q&A.
I'd be happy to. Next question, does the budget need to be for COVID expenses that are above and beyond what we're budgeted for, or can it cover COVID expenses that are, can it cover expenses that are COVID related but within normal activities? Leslie or Julia? Julia, you're unmuted in case you were trying to answer. The question again is, does the budget need to be for COVID expenses that are above and beyond what we had budgeted, or can it cover expenses that are COVID related but within our quote normal activities?
I would say the expenses have to be COVID related during this period of public health emergency.
Great, thank you, Julia. So the answer is they just need to be COVID related. Next question, do we have an example of what a board resolution should say? And related, do we also have an example of an opinion of counsel? Julia.
If necessary, we can provide a template document.
So to follow Julia's statement, her response is that yes, we can provide an example. Just to operationalize that, I'll request that if you'd like an example, that you submit that request to the email, which is listed in the RFA. I believe it's, I can't find it off the top of my head actually, so I'll make sure that we put up the last slide here, which has the email. So with regards to the requests for example documentations, please just submit them to the email. Thank you all for your patience as we continue. We've got a few more questions. Do all expenses have to be expended after the grant is awarded, or can expenses prior to the award be applied to the grant?
This is Sheila Miller. Yes, it could be expenses, if it's expenses incurred prior to the grant award, but not before the mayor's public health emergency, which was mid-March. So it's expenses incurred mid-March, the date of the mayor's public health emergency on would be eligible.
Thank you, Sheila. And then when will we know if the grant extends beyond December 31, 2020? So to paraphrase, is it the intention of the agency to extend the grant beyond the period already listed?
Well, my understanding would be that it would depend on how long this emergency is occurring. So the way we've contemplated stated, it's until the end of the calendar year. And if we know something differently or things change that to everyone.
Thank you, Leslie. Those are, I believe, all of the questions that I can see. I will do a quick double check while I also look to see who has joined on the phone. So you'll give me a brief second. And while I'm doing that, I've pulled up the email for questions that I referred to, which is that questions can be submitted after this information session to nba.rfa@dc.gov, which would be a good option for people on the phone. And that's also the email where you should submit requests for example documents. So if you asked about an example document, we'd ask that you submit the request for that document there. And that additional information, to the extent that we think it would be helpful, we'll be sure to add to the DHCD website page where this information is listed. And I apologize, I cannot get to the people who've joined on the phone who may have questions that can't type them into the chat. So I will respectfully request that those be submitted to nba.rfa@dc.gov and apologize to those phone participants. So if I'll give folks a minute to ask any last minute questions. I do see one, which is the health emergency date March 15th? In which case, I don't know that any of us have that off the top of our head, but essentially the mayor issued a mayor's order declaring a public health emergency. And on that date is when the expenses can be incurred and thereafter. And a helpful participant has shared that that date was March 11th. But again, it's the date that the mayor issued her first mayor's order declaring the public health emergency. And we will answer this question, as we have with all questions, in writing and post a updated Q&A on the website. So seeing no further questions in the Q&A and no further questions in the chat, we will adjourn this information session and thank everybody for participating. Remind folks that applications are due by Monday, July 20th at 5 p.m. and that they can and only be submitted on Zoom grants. And the link is available in the RFA, and the RFA is available on our website as well as the coronavirus website. So just want to quickly thank all of our guests, Director Donaldson, General Counsel Julia Wiley, Housing Compliance Officer Leslie Edmond, our Deputy Director for Programs, Sheila Miller, and this is Richard Livingston. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff and Communications Director. The recording of this will be posted online shortly after. Thank you all again, and we wish you a wonderful afternoon.